May Allah keep you all safe, healthy, blessed, and protect you all from worldly evils. And may Allah hasten the appearance of Imam of our time and make us true companion of our Imam, inshallah. Ameen. Today in our show, we will be discussing about the genocide within the past 1 or 2 centuries, which has been happening, especially against Muslims, and through waging wars, through whatever ways it has been happening, and there is so many countless millions of people who have been killed and massacred in these kind of genocides, target killings, and different types of wars against Muslims. Even if you take the name of proxy wars within the Muslims, or direct wars, or whatever way you can name it, but it's the kind of genocide throughout the history, and it has been happening. And even now in this century, in 21st century, we are seeing these things still happening, and why it is happening, and who are behind these genocides, and what are their aims and objectives to do that, because millions and trillions of peoples are being killed every 5-10 years, and we are just watching, and we are just seeing, and we are just unable to do anything. So we need to understand why this has been happening throughout the history, even in 21st century, and how we can stop it, and who is responsible for these things. We will be discussing that in further details. We do have very respectable, honorable guest with us. We'll move towards our guest, and we'll see what is happening around the globe in recent history, and why. So we do have Brother Sayyid Muhsin Abbas with us, and Maulana Zainul Abidin Qazafi with us. I would like to convey my salam and welcome to both of you on our show on Hidayat TV. Thank you so much for joining in.
Thank you.
Brother Mohsin, first of all, I will try to start from you, because obviously you do have very good grasp on history, as Maulana do also have. But first of all, I would like to know, in this past century, if we recent 1 or 2 centuries, we look at the different, kind of. If we dig out the history, so how many genocides do you see? I mean, we see the people in Sudan, people in Bosnia, who were killed, even in Iran-Iraq war, in Myanmar, and there are so many. There is a long list of Muslims who were killed by whatever manners, whether you take the name of Iran-Iraq war, or whether you take the war in Yemen, whatever you say. But it's in one way or other, it's been happening, and people who were most affected with these wars and things like that are the Muslims. So how would you describe, if you could give a short, brief list of these genocides which have been happening, and why it is happening? We can dig out it further afterwards.
Yes, Assalamu alaikum, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The record of Anglo-Zionist imperialism over the last, let me say the watershed I'd like to start with is 1979, the Islamic Revolution in Iran, which is really the turning point in many ways of history, as I see it. And it's also important from the Anglo-Zionist genocidal perspective, because the revolution itself triggered the Americans and their allies, including the Israelis, to hatch a plot to engage Saddam Hussein, to start an 8-year war, the imposed war, we used to call it, or it is referred to by the Iranians particularly. That imposed war by the Anglo-Zionist Empire was a proxy effort to bring down the Islamic Revolution of Iran, and it cost the lives of well over 1 million Iraqis and Iranians. The use of gas and biological weapons and chemical weapons by Iraq, by Saddam, was facilitated by companies legitimized by America, etc. Basically, the West financed the gassing of Iranians and the annihilation that took place during those 8 years of war, just because they wanted to bring Iran down and they wanted to destroy the Islamic Revolution. Since then, the Americans, quite frankly, haven't looked back, nor have the Israelis. And just one report, overall, I would estimate something like 6 million, 5 to 6 million Muslims have been killed, murdered over this period from 1979 until the present, taking in the war in Afghanistan, taking in the war against Lebanon several times by Israel, including the war on Syria, including the fake war on terror that the Americans generally unleashed, including the the Gulf War that they regard as the first one. I regard the war on Iran as the first Gulf War. The second one was on Iraq, and the third one they did on Iraq as well. So counting those, counting their annihilation of Libya, if I was to move back into West Asia, then Yemen remains something like 10, 12-year non-stop war, maybe longer. I almost run out of breath really trying to keep up with how many wars they've engaged in and how many people they've killed. So at least 14 Muslim countries, a minimum, there may be more than that if I haven't quite fully counted it, have been either occupied, attacked, or in some way or other violently engaged because of the Anglo-Zionist American greed for oil, for domination, for control, and for general, mayhem and conflict and division in the Muslim world. These are biblical figures. When you start talking about 6 million Muslims being killed, you can only begin to imagine how many were then injured, because that will run into double figures potentially. And if you add to that the people who were displaced and who became refugees as a result of that, well, now you go into sort of like hundreds of millions, impacted. You're closer to 500 million plus, maybe I would say. And those refugees remain displaced in many, many areas, and largely the displacement and the refugee, if you like, the job of supporting those refugees has fallen on countries like Islamic Republic of Iran or Pakistan or Lebanon or Turkey. These are the nations that have largely also had to bear the brunt of the migration and the refugee crisis that's kicked in because of those wars. So you see that what the Americans have done is absolutely genocidal. You cannot describe, once you start talking about millions of people killed, you can only use words like infanticide and genocide and ethnic cleansing to describe these things. And of course, they left no stone unturned to test every kind of weapon they've got. Hypersonic weapons in Afghanistan, weapons that can go deep underground. They've used nuclear-tipped weapons. They've used phosphorus bombs to burn children. They've used cluster bombs, barrel bombs. They used all the modern ballistic missiles at their disposal. So they've been testing their weapons on basically civilians and children indiscriminately. The microcosm of that you can see happening in Israel, where they've dropped something like 8,000 to 9,000 bombs within the space of 10, 20 days, perhaps even more than that. Certainly it was 6,000 in the first nine days. And they just last night celebrated that they hit 300 more civilian residential buildings. This is what you're dealing with, a maniacal, psychotic, out of control, genocidal set of imperialists. There are no words to describe the scale of barbarism and the lust for war and their kind of ability to construct ever new ways of killing people, whether it's by setting off fires in those regions, burning wheat in Syria, destroying the land, polluting the environments, creating cholera outbreaks, for instance, Yemen, massive cholera outbreaks deliberately by bombing water infrastructure and like. And of course, Islam has a lot to say about this, because the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, gave us rules for war. He gave us even in warfare, not to cut trees, not to attack civilians, not to kill children, not to brutalize and maim, even people who've fallen in battle, that you have to act in a humane way, even during a time of war. These are the principles that Islam has taught us, and these are the principles actually, the main, if you like, target of Anglo-Zionist American imperialism has still maintained. This resistance axis led by Iran, joined by the Ansarullah, supported by the Hezbollah, supported by the Hashd al-Shahabi and beyond, and now, of course, latterly supported by Islamic Jihad, Hamas, and the Palestinian resistance. This is a noble resistance, which is the diametrically opposed force and a diametrically opposed sets of value-based, if you like, warriors. You see their actions in this same period in the response to America has been that they target military facilities. They are very specific about who they take on. They abide by the Islamic rules of war. The Americans not only went in and decimated and destroyed directly with their own bombs and missiles and their own armies, they employed, of course, proxy forces. The primary one, of course, I mentioned was Saddam initially, but once they'd had enough of him, they had to set about using him as the excuse as a dictator to go and sit down permanently. Currently, the US has maybe anything up to over 100, 150 bases dotted around the entire West Asian region. They have Iran surrounded, and they're embedded within the Western Asian region to basically carry on the exploitation. So you can see that the industrial military complex, which the Americans formed the head of the beast in terms of, you know, the amount of money they spend. By the way, they spend more on arms, the Americans, than the next 14 countries combined. You know, if you put America's spending on military hardware, and then you put the next 14 countries, including China, Russia, all of the big powers, they still won't be able to match fully the American output on arsenal and their production of weapons. The arms industry that they serve, it's really the most profitable and the largest business in the world, more than oil. It's the arms industry. So the likes of Raytheon, which operate out of America, or Lockheed Martin, or the hundreds of other military outlets, or the Elbit outfits in Britain who manufacture guns and weapons here, and the Israeli, defense industry, the British defense industry, and the American defense industry. These, you're talking about trillions. And these trillions, of course, are linked to the transnational corporate world, and the transnational corporate world led by the likes of BlackRock and led by Vanguard and all of these other hidden forces, national forces, which also love war because they make money out of war. Because not only do you make money out of war in terms of the guns and sold and the missiles that are fired, but you also make it out of having to replenish those supplies. You also make the money out of then the damage, the construction industry that will have to be built up to rebuild those countries that they damage. So you see how economically profitable it is for these transnational corporates also. They go in, they make money. They make money whether there's peace or war, but it seems they make more money out of war, and that's why they're hand in glove with the likes of America. And America is often, I just regard it as a puppet of these transnational corporate villains who basically use America as a policeman to go around making sure they can rape the resources of particularly the global south. I'll pause there because I think that kind of gives people hopefully an overview. America is at the heart of this death and destruction, and we'll go on to why they do it beyond the reasons I mentioned perhaps later.
Malana, I would ask you the same question because obviously everyone do have their own perspective while seeing something. So how do you see that genocide which has been happening like in past 100 or 200 years, and what are the goals? Some of the goals obviously Muslim Bhai have mentioned, like there are money mafias behind them, and they earn money through wars, and they obviously control the governments and whatever way they can achieve their goals, they do it anyway. So how do you see these genocides, and what are your thoughts on that? What are the ultimate objectives of these genocides? Is it just because we are Muslim, or it's just the bigger agenda outside the religion as well, or something?
Uh, Thank you, dear sister, for having me, and shukran to my dear brother Said Mohsin, for your interesting contributions. Of course, we do see that over the last few centuries, there has been a genocide and an active hostility enacted against the Muslim regions, but not only the Muslims of the world and the Muslim regions, upon all those nations that seek to have self-sovereignty, that seek independence, and that differ with the Western narrative of the United States of America and their Western allies. We see that in 1979, with the offset of the Islamic Revolution, Imam Khomeini rahmatullahi alayhi, he has termed the United States as the great Satan, and very aptly so, as we see that the policies of the United States, not only internally within their own country, but their foreign policy, the intervention in other countries' internal affairs, have shown only one thing, that they come forward as a criminal entity and a criminal regime to create havoc, to loot resources, to steal minerals, and of course to impose their own proxy governments in those regions. The United States itself is a criminal regime, such as the illegitimate Zionist regime, in that they are born out of the genocide, the ethnic cleansing, the looting of the land of the indigenous peoples of the Americas. This is a historical fact. It's an ugly fact that the Americans today cannot run away from. This is an historic recorded truth that the United States is born out of the genocide of the indigenous people inside of the Americas. At the same time, they have not only created themselves out of genocide, but they have continued to export this agenda of domination upon other nations. We see the war that was imposed in Vietnam. We see that illegal chemicals such as Agent Orange was used on the civilian population of Vietnam. The same way today, the illegitimate Zionist regime, they use the chemical white phosphorus upon the civilian population of Palestine, something which is illegal in terms of the rules of engagements, and it may not be used in residential areas. So we see that the United States, firstly, is a criminal entity that was born out of genocide and that have continued an agenda of imposing their criminal ways upon other nations. Imam Khomeini had termed them the Great Satan, and we see that the United States today is playing out the agenda which is anti-God, anti-Islamic, and anti-humanity. Correct? We see, for instance, the agendas that they are pushing today. Agendas such as legalizing homosexuality, the agenda of transgenders, and all these other evils and vices. Today, it is coming from the United States of America and their allies across the world. And the biggest opposition to the anti-God, anti-humanity, unnatural agenda of the United States is al-Islam and the Islamic nations in pursuit of a world order which is there to lead people towards closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is why today the Islamic Republic of Iran is the greatest enemy of the United States, because we have two sides, we have two opposite ends. On one end you have an anti-God, anti-humanity, secularist agenda which is being carried out by the United States, and on the other hand you have a God-centric government with a God-centric worldview which is being pushed and implemented by the Islamic Republic of Iran. So the United States is the great Satan, as per Imam Khomeini's words, and they are carrying out the agenda of Shaitan. We will remember that in the Quran, Shaitan makes an oath with Allah that for the rest of his life that he would mislead humanity. Now this we mustn't look at as a small agenda, that Shaitan is a little man with the horns and a fork, and he comes and he whispers in our ears to do the wrong thing. No, we understand that Shaitan himself was as in the ranks of the angels with years and years of intelligence, and that the agenda of misleading humanity is being implemented on a grand, holistic, global scale, not something as small as a devil coming to whisper in our ears. And today we see this agenda, the anti-God agenda of deceiving people, misleading people, is being carried out by the United States. And therefore, Imam Khomeini's statement was correct, that the United States is the great Satan. It is therefore that they have taken on an agenda to dominate the Muslim lands, to weaken al-Islam, and to isolate those countries and those governments, specifically the Islamic Republic of Iran today, which holds a God-centric worldview. And this is the issue for the United States of America. We see, as Sayyid Muhsin has mentioned, the imposed Iran-Iraq war, the wars in Yemen, the invasion of Iraq, the invasion of Afghanistan. We see the illegitimate wars imposed and the occupation of Lebanon until Hezbollah expelled them in 2000. And in 2006, the occupation of the Palestinian land. We see today that the United States, they are supporting the Moroccan monarchy in occupying the Sahrawi and the Polisario people in their lands in Western Sahara today. We also see that in the DRC alone, since 1996 till this current 2023, that more than 5 million people have died as a result of imperialist-led wars, which is funded and supported through the intervention of the United States of America. Throughout Africa today, we see that the United States or their allies such as France are still benefiting from the stolen minerals and the stolen resources of the people. So throughout the world, we are seeing that not only has there been an historic opposition from the United States and their allies against the Muslims and against the oppressed people, but it's still happening in this current day that we are in. And it seems that the only way for Muslim people to oppose this hegemony of the United States is to follow the example as set up by the Islamic Republic of Iran as the organic heart of the resistance axis. Therefore, with the support of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Syria was able to defeat ISIS, which itself was funded, logistically supported by the United States. In Iraq, the Hashd al-Sha'bi was able to defeat ISIS, again supported by the United States, and of course the Hashd was supported financially, logistically by the Islamic Republic of Iran. And today the resistance that we see to the unjust occupation of the Zionist regime on the Palestinian people, this resistance that we see today, it is supported by the Islamic Republic of Iran. And so I think that when we look at it, not only on the global scale, but when we look at it from our religious texts, we do see that the United States is that manifestation of Shaitan today, which is imposing domination on humanity and misleading humanity to a liberal anti-God society, whereas the Islamic Republic of Iran and the resistance axis, meaning the true believers, the Mujahideen, they are pushing a different narrative that is a God-centric narrative, a narrative to guide the world towards closeness and a reliance on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Muslim, I would move on further. So, how we can come out of this hegemony of, for instance, America or those imperialistic powers? Because at the moment, obviously, it's still happening in Palestine, for instance, along with many other places, in whatever manners. And we still see, like, we, as a person, as a human being, we still see, like, whether it's the civilization, whether it's our education, whether it is our pure values or even human values, if we say, they are lying and cheating and stealing and looting and killing and raping and doing everything they can, but they are like, there is no one who can ask them about it. And if somebody asks them about it, they say you have to resign it, for instance. So this kind of double standards, the whole world is seeing it. So what future do you see with these things of this world, and what kind of objectives they do have, which you were about to mention. But obviously, you can mention them along with this part as well, so we can move a little further. Like, what are the real steps we need to take towards that freedom, which is really required at this moment of time. Like, we could come out of this web which is like holding us back and keeping us away from the truth. And there are so much torture and so much painful things which are happening against humanity. Like, so is something, what are your advices and how do you see it?
So, first of all, to find any solution, you have to really know the problem. You have to first of all understand the problem, not just the symptoms of the problem. You must make a thorough analysis of the root causes of your problem. Muslims tend, by and large, to be politically a little bit naive, illiterate perhaps as well. They never get to the root of the problem. They don't do their homework to go and see where the root is. Just today, Ayatollah Raisi was emphasizing that America is the root of the problem, and it's not Israel. So just there, the Iranians do tend to go for root causes, and then they devise a strategy to take on those root causes. When Ayatollah Raisi talks about America, what we've got to understand is a little bit more depth. What is America? The United States, first of all, is a nation state. But behind that nation state is the underwriting of a transnational corporate elite. The Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the banking industry, and Wall Street long ago took away the actual democracy of America. So you're not dealing with a democracy, you're dealing with a Congress and a fake kind of institutional hierarchical structure, a system, which pretends to be a democracy, but in fact is just a plutocracy or a kleptocracy or a kakistocracy, whatever you want to call it. It's ruled by a few very, very, very wealthy individuals and entities and people, and they dictate what goes on in reality in America. And it's even enshrined in their legal system. The Fed basically controls American cash. It's not the American government itself. The American government is in debt, $31 trillion or more. So first of all, when Ayatollah Raisi or Ayatollah Khamenei or Ayatollah Khomeini talk about America as the shaitan, they're talking about the physical manifestation. But the reality of what inside that American mechanism and system is this kind of huge corrupted money power. That money power essentially does things anywhere in the world that it wants so that it can maintain its money power and maintain its prominence. Now, to give you an overview, if you look at things only from a perspective of states fighting each other, then you have a different geopolitical analysis. Iran wants to be free, America doesn't want it to be free, Iran and America having a clash. That's how you see it on one level. If you go to the next level, you will see that actually, if there are national forces like BlackRock or Vanguard, as I mentioned, then you have to evaluate your geopolitical overview in a slightly different way. Because what if the First World War and the Second World War were financed and bankrolled by the same kind of money power, and Germany and Russia and America and etc. were simply puppets financed and bankrolled by different forces in order to create a new world order, which was different from the old colonial imperial monarchist order. What if by the end of the Second World War, what was meant to happen was the rise of an American imperialist order, which took over from British colonialism and French colonialism and whatnot, because those means of controlling and subjugating people were no longer effective, and people had woken up to them. What if it was that this same money power needed a new system to confuse people? Because don't forget, when America so-called won the Second World War, actually it was won by the Russians, and 1.5 million Muslims who also died and gave their lives in that World War against Germany and whatnot. So there's a whole debate to be had about what the Second World War was really about. But if you go with my theory, bear with me, and go with my theory that money power was simply transferring the location of its financial and military base from Western European colonialist powers to an American imperialist base. And for the next 100 years, the intention was that oil and all of the subsequent wealth that was going to come out from the world, especially in West Asia, needed to be controlled by a military force that was residing in America. And that's what we got. Because don't forget, when the Americans arrived on the scene post Second World War, the colonies didn't regard America as an imperialism. It wasn't Britain. So people thought, oh, America is kind of, a benign agency. They haven't come and occupied us or colonized us. They're not an ex-imperial power formally. So perhaps they're going to be fair and they mean all this democracy, equality business. Is it for real? Of course, it was an illusion. Of course, the money power had simply switched its location of operation, as far as I'm concerned, to Washington and to Wall Street, and was investing in the U.S. Boots on the ground military in order to do what it had done for centuries with the British Army and with the East India Company of Britain. So what I'm seeing now is that actually having really burned out American credibility, because after all these wars, you talk about Yugoslavia, you talk about their involvement in Somalia, or we talk about the NATO bombings of Libya, or what they did in Serbia, etc., or what they've done throughout that region generally. If we talk about Afghanistan, I won't go over the list again. You know what we're talking about. If now the whole world is fed up with them, everybody's had a dose of American democracy. They've had a dose of American equality. They understand what it means when you bring in Americanization and culture. The leaders haven't had enough, because puppets like the Saudis and the Kuwaitis and the Qataris and the Jordanians and the Egyptians, these people were born again from the First and Second World War victories of Anglo-Zionist Western imperialism. So they were not only constructed by them, but they've been maintained by them, and they rely on them, and they are not independent sovereign nations or leaders. They basically are puppets, and they serve their master. The trick is this: instead of using the old colonial mechanisms where a white man came into a black country and ruled it, it was quite obvious that you were a slave and you were being ruled by foreigners. So what they did was, with this kind of imperialism, US imperialism, they used brown people and black people who were elitists in their own country, gave them a lot of money, a lot of power, and those people, they educated them as well in their own universities, and then they sent them back to rule those countries so that they would never rise up, and they would also give their resources. So everybody from Hosni Mubarak to any other, all the monarchs of Saudi Arabia, from the even before Shah Faisal and all of these guys, they were all basically pandering as puppets to the people who'd got them power in the first place. So you've got a scenario where, well, first of all, you've got to understand the nature of who you're up against. There is a system, and the system is corrupt by nature, because it wants to be corrupt. It has an evil core. So when you adopt it, when you adopt its culture, when you let it in to rule you politically, when you buy its weapons, when you serve its purposes, when you invest in its real estate, and you accept its money, the dollar, and what you're doing is you're accepting the slavery to that system. So the first thing that people need to do, and that's what needs to happen, is the Muslim world in particular, it has one religion. But the sectarianism is fueled by, again, the Anglo-Zionist Westerns. But your religion is one, Islam. You have one Kaaba. You have one prophet. You have a culture which is very similar. Even your cuisine has similarities. Even your clothes and your dresses have few similarities. Your values have massive similarities about honor and dignity and virtues, and all of those things inculcated in the Holy Quran. You have one Holy Quran which gives you a base from Morocco as far as Indonesia. It's the same. There's a lot of commonality. Yet those Muslim countries cannot come together. They have the OIC. They can't come together and unite, even when it comes to preventing people burning the Quran. Why? because there, first of all, are too many hypocrites and too many sellouts and too many puppets who are ruling those countries. It's therefore obligatory on the people who see these sellouts and these people who are wasting the resources of the Muslim Ummah, who are completely devoid of any loyalty to Islam or any commitment towards humanity, humanitarian, virtue ethics-based society. Of course, it's obligatory to resist them. You have to resist them by educating your children in one aspect. You have to resist them by not buying from their agencies if you possibly can. You have to resist them by not following their hyper-material cultures and their value systems. You have to resist them maybe even ultimately militarily. If they are so violent and nasty and so intent on spreading corruption in the land. And the Holy Quran and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it very clear, spreading fitna, spreading corruption in the land, and doing things which are, and being a munafiq or a hypocrite, and being somebody who is against the Ummah itself. It's very clear how the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, dealt with those people. It's very clear what the Quran says about how you deal with them. So why is it that 1.7 or 8 billion Muslims in the world look to others to come and liberate them? Why is it that we look to others to solve the problem? The problem has to be solved by the people, and you can't blame it all on the leaders, because you select the leaders, or if it's a democracy, and if they're dictators, then you're acquiescing to that dictatorship, and you don't stand up against it. And when real forces stand up, like the Islamic Republic of Iran, you accuse them of being Shia, you want to label them as something that is nothing to do with you. When the likes of the Yemen Ansarullah stand up and they're Sunni, you still want to turn them into Rafidis or say something whatever against them, or you want to blame them for even rising up. You go to Syria, if he's a Sunni and he's an elected leader, some will call him a dictator, but others will say he's a democratic leader. Because he stands up against America, you say he's not a real Arab and he's actually a dictator and a despot and we should destroy him. And you take money from the Iraqi, the real despots, the monarchists, Qatar and Saudi and wherever else, and you invest in ISIS and you invest in Al-Qaeda to destroy a man who's given Syria stability. Let's face it. The same happened with Gaddafi in Libya. Whatever he was, he gave stability to that country, and he was actually still very much for his own nation. He didn't sell out. And yet, what happened when they had to overturn him? It was his own people they used. And the same thing they do everywhere. So basically, it's we as Muslims, first of all, need to be smarter, politically more literate. We need to have values. Don't just say you're Muslim, actually live by the values. Anybody can say, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, and fine, you're a Muslim. But it doesn't make you a practicing Muslim if you're then against all of the virtues, all the values, all of the essence of Islam. And if you stab your own Muslim brother in the back the first chance you get. So the problem lies within us, the Muslim people. That's why we have monarchies and imperialisms. That's why we have a religion which we don't follow in practice, in reality. That's why we have nations which are servants and ghulam, if you like, servile status to the enemies of Islam. And until that mentality changes within the people, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran clearly that I need you to make an effort. I'll come to you. If you come one step towards me, then I'll come to you. You see my grace. The problem lies within Muslims, I say primarily. I don't think we should complain about Anglo-Zionist imperialists as much as we should complain about ourselves, because they are there doing what they want to do, which is to take your resources, to subjugate you, to enslave you, and to try to destroy Islamic values. What are you doing in return to that? You've got to look at your mirror and say, am I following Anglo-Zionist American culture and values, or am I following Islamic culture and values? Are my heroes and models Islamic people like Imam Khamenei, or the leader of Lebanese resistance, or the leaders of Ansarullah, or are my leaders like Hosni Mubarak was, or like today's Sisi and these kind of dictatorial, arrogant, conceited puppets that exist? Who are your leaders? Your leaders reflect you. So if that's what your leaders are, first look at yourself and say, is that what I am as well? Before, and then if you're not, don't want to be that, you should be opposing them and you should be deposing them. You should be doing everything, as Malcolm X says, using any means necessary to erase and get rid of this leadership.
Muslim bhai, you mentioned very important points. Obviously, so here when we think about the enemies, obviously first. Obviously, responsibility comes upon us. So, if we have to save our house, we have to build that, all the security resources, for instance, or all the coming in and out. We have to look up at these things as well. Obviously, so we are responsible as a human being first. Whatever is happening to us. So, Maulana, I would like to ask you. Obviously, when it comes to common people, who educate them, and how much important is this responsibility, to make people realize that you have the responsibility of humanity as well as your children. So where do you think we are lacking that in 57 around countries, Muslim countries, there is no one who would have, except if we say Iran, for instance, but except Iran, there is no one we can say like there is some kind of Islamic religious or right leaders we have. If we want to remake or reconstruct our political system, for instance, in any country based on true Islamic Quranic right values, it is really difficult to do that, for instance. So why? Who is responsible? Obviously, we don't have those think tanks. We don't have that media. We don't have that power, which is able to stop these kind of massacre, which is happening around the globe. No matter if they are Muslim or not, the first thing is it is crime against humanity, and we as a human and as a Muslim are responsible for stopping it. But first of all, we have to understand what weaknesses we are dealing with, and why after whole 100 years, for instance, if we just think about these past 100 years, we have been being killed by everyone and humiliated and disrespected, and even now we are seeing all these things and we are not still learning the lessons. So, who is responsible for that kind of awakening which is required for this situation? And what propaganda machines and strategies? Obviously, they are using our weaknesses as their power. So, how do you see it?
Shukran very much for your question. Look, in terms of our responsibility to be Muslim in totality, to submit to the Quran, to follow in the footsteps of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, as the Quran says, Sami'na wa ata'na, that we have heard the command of the Prophet and that we have obeyed those commands. Apart from leadership, the responsibility lies with each and every individual. Today, we are not in a state that we were a few centuries ago. We have access to vast information right around us. We have the internet, we have social media, we have news outlets, we have shows such as this very one that you and your team are making available to the entire globe. Brother Mohsin, I believe, or yourself, you're based in the UK, I am based in Cape Town, yet we are able to come together on this platform that you have provided to discuss these pertinent issues that affect the Muslims and that affect the oppressed masses of the world. So it is the responsibility of each and every Muslim, first and foremost, to submit wholeheartedly and fully to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to follow the footsteps of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and to follow the footsteps of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimu salatu wassalam. We have a propaganda machine, if you would like to call it. We have the codified book of instructions, which is the kalam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that is the Holy Quran. Each and every Muslim, we have access to this book, and this is the book of guidance, Hudan lil Muttaqin, as the Quran says. It is the book which is a guidance for muttaqin, for people to reach that higher stage of consciousness and closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In addition to that, we have also seen that various of the leaders that we follow today, they have been subjected to worse conditions than what we have been subjected. We look at Ayatollah Shahid Muhammad Baqir Sadr, born in 1935, murdered and achieved martyrdom in 1985 at the tender age of 40 years old or 45 years old. He was born in the era of Saddam. There was mass restrictions on the Muslims, and particularly the Shia and the Shia in Iraq by the Ba'ath Saddam regime. Right? But a man like him, he rose to great lengths on which agenda? Submitting to Allah and following the commands of the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. He had become a symbol of heroism, a symbol of resistance, and he had died a martyr. A lesson for all of us to learn from today. They did not have social media. They did not have the liberal rights that we have today in the Western countries. They were facing the worst kind of oppression, living under the worst kind of surveillance, being imprisoned, being tortured, eventually led to martyrdom, but they did not compromise on their religious beliefs. If we look at our leader, Imam Khomeini rahmatullahi alayhi, the same, during the time of the Shah, that Iran was the country that had the most diplomatic relations and economic relations with the Zionist regime in the entire Gulf. That it is reported that before the 1979 revolution, the Islamic Republic of Iran was even importing eggs from the United States. So imagine a nation that you cannot produce enough eggs for your own people. Khomeini rahmatullahi alayhi was born in such a condition where he was given no importance to scholarship, right? A scholar was only good enough to sit in the mosque and to lead salah. They had no social standing, they had no social recognition, they had no respect or stature outside of the four walls of a mosque. Imam Khomeini rahmatullahi alayhi, he had followed our compass, our symbol of instruction, which is Al-Quran, and he had internalized the message of the Ahlul Bayt, he has internalized the message of Karbala, and attached himself to the Imam of our time, and Imam Khomeini rahmatullahi alayhi was able to reach the heights of closeness to Allah, was able to overthrow an entire regime, and of course was able to establish a government which is in the narrative of promoting God consciousness and leading people to closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have our great leaders, Imam Said Ali Khamenei, we have Said Hassan Nasrullah, Shahid Sadiq Sadr, Shahid PhD, Ayatollah Muhammad Hussein Fadlullah, Shahid Abbas Musawi, Shahid Musa Sadr, and we have an array of examples both within the Sunni and the Shia world that stand as heroes for us today. We have access to their life stories, we have access to the internet, we have access to books, we have access to all of the resources. However, the first thing that we as the people need to do, we need to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and submit to the Quran. That is the first step that we need to take. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Holy Quran, in Surah Fatah, verse 28, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, هو الذي أرسل رسوله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله وكفى بالله شهيدا. That Allah is the one who sends the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam with the guidance and this message and the system of truth, a system which triumphs all other systems. وكفى بالله شهيدا. And that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is enough for us as a witness that we need to submit to the system of the Prophet. But then the Quran continues, it says, Muhammad Rasulullah وَالَّذِينَ مَعَهُ أَشِدَّاءُ عَلَى الْكُفَّارِ رُحَمَاءُ بَيْنَهُمْ. Where Allah says that Muhammad is the messenger of God, and those that are with Muhammad, that we are harsh, Ashidda'u alal kuffar. Now when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about kuffar in this context, it is not those that perhaps disbelieve in al-Islam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks to the context of war, that when the people are at war with al-Islam, where there is hostility against Islam and the Muslims, a situation that we see today, a situation that we see today, from every direction, there is an onslaught against Islam, correct? Today in France, the woman cannot wear the niqab by choice. Is that correct? That you are banned from even wearing the niqab. We can't even today question the authenticity of the Holocaust, let alone deny it. to question the authenticity of the Holocaust, it is a big problem. You can be arrested, you can be cancelled. However, they have the freedom to mock the Prophet ﷺ, to draw insulting figures about the Prophet ﷺ, to come in the open and to burn the Holy Quran, to attack the Muslim lands, be it in Afghanistan, be it in Iraq, be it in Syria, be it in Palestine, be it all around the world. The Islamic lands are under attack. Our religion is under attack. Our women cannot wear the hijab, and they are being ridiculed, and they are being mocked in the public and in the society. So from every direction, there is an onslaught and an attack on al-Islam and the Muslims. And then the Quran says, Muhammad Rasulullah, وَالَّذِينَ مَعَهُ أَشِدَّاءُ عَلَى الْكُفَّارِ, that those that are with Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, that they are harsh against the kuffar, those people that are hostile and attacking Islam from every direction. Today, we are seeing that very thing, that Islam is under attack from every direction. So if we are with Muhammad, if we are with al-Islam, that we must defend against that attack that comes against Islam, be it a military attack, be it an attack of morals, be it the attack in literature, from every direction where that attack is. If we submit to al-Islam, then we must stand against those attacks that are coming against Islam and coming against the Muslims, رُحَمَاءُ بَيْنَهُمْ, and that they are compassionate and merciful amongst themselves. So ours should be to attach ourselves to those very leaders that have shown us the path. Those leaders exist amongst Sunni and amongst Shia. They exist in the Islamic Republic of Iran. They exist in the Ansarullah, said Abdul Malik al-Houthi. They exist in the Izzuddin Qasim brigades, the military wing of Hamas, not a Shia organization, Sunni organizations. They exist in Hezbollah. They exist in Iraq amongst the Hashd and the various factions in the Hashd amongst the Islamic Jihad, that the leadership, current contemporary leadership for the Muslims, that they exist today. Imam Khamenei exists today, Sayyid Nasrullah exists today, various leaders in the West like Sheikh Hamza Saudagar, Sheikh Muzaffar Haidar from the Islamic Pulse, they are around us today, and we have all the necessary tools around us, like the media, like the internet, to learn from them, to internalize Islam, and to submit to the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we oppose injustice, we oppose tyranny, and we oppose any system which promotes anti-godliness and promotes anti-humanity. So this resource is available to us. We attach ourselves to them, and we submit to the call of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the call of the oppressed. 75 of Nisa, وَمَا لَكُمْ لَا تُقَاتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and what is the matter with you that you do not fight in the path of Allah for the oppressed people amongst the men, women and children? Those who call out, oh Allah, save us from this lands of oppression, and give us from amongst you a helper, and give from amongst you a guide. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala challenges us, وَمَا لَكُمْ لَا تُقَاتِلُونَ. What is the matter with us? So we have a challenge. If we want to be the true Muslims, committed to al-Islam, that we need to answer this call, and that we must give a significant resistance and opposition to injustice, to oppression, and to tyranny. This is the call of Islam, and of course this is the call that Muslims should answer to.
Thank you so much, Maulana. Muslim, we just have 2 minutes. If you can precisely conclude anything you want to.
Well, I'd say that, of course, we must oppose American imperialism, Anglo-Zionist American imperialism of the day. It's the biggest job that you can do in terms of fighting for justice. So the first thing is to speak out against it. If you can't speak out, then at least silently in your own circles condemn it. And if you can't even do, if you can do more than that, well, get out on the streets and join others to protest against that tyranny. But don't just sit doing nothing. First of all, there's an obligation. The second thing is that work on alternatives. It's easy to say American imperialism is rotten and it's rubbish and it's corrupt. Well, unless you can offer people an alternative, then you aren't doing your job, because you can't tell people who have mortgages, have houses, have children to look after, and are operating within a system, to say, oh, get rid of all that system, but then, and not also say to them, oh, but here's what should happen. So the thing is, I mean, we have a roadmap. We have a roadmap which says very, very different things from the hyper materialist, hyper sexualized, hyper neoliberalized vision that is being forced down the Western people's throat by this Anglo-Zionist imperialism. Islam has that manual, it has that roadmap. The problem is that many Muslim leaders, a lot of the religious scholars, they've ignored it as well. They've not told the people exactly what that roadmap is. Quite often I find that roadmap exists more strongly within good non-Muslims now than actual conservative Muslims. So, for instance, you'll see good non-Muslims talking about us working towards a non-materialistic society, a less materialistic society. You'll see them talking about looking after the environment, not just in the way that about global climate change. This is nonsense. But cutting down trees and not replanting them, wasting the resources, buying too many things, allowing dyes and all these other things to be used because we want more and more clothes, more and more things. This is an anti-Islamic culture. Yet we often, I can't often group the people who follow the prophetic dream as simply Muslim or non-Muslim. Quite often we can learn a lot of things from our non-Muslim brothers and sisters who are heading down what I think are very Islamic paths, whether it's around ecology or even education, looking at education and finding the vision for children which the Prophet wanted, maybe homeschooling, because a lot of, it wasn't a factory-produced set of children that the Prophet was given. I could go on and on. What I'm saying is that imperialism and Anglo-Zionist imperialist values are not just about military power and destruction of us, they're about a much wider thing. We must educate ourselves about what Islamic alternative is and be articulate in presenting it by first of all thinking and developing, listening to the scholars who give us the ideas, listening to others as well, and coming up with a clear dream, a clear roadmap, and a clear direction instead of goals.
Thank you so much, Mohsin Bhaiya, and thank you so much, Maulana, for it was an honor to have you both on the show on this significant topic. To the viewers, I would take a leave on this point that we all have responsibility, and first responsibility is to educate ourselves to serve humanity and bring peace on this world, inshallah. I'll take a leave and see you, inshallah, next week. Allah Hafiz.